What up? This is Patrick Haize. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And today I want to talk about healing, because healing is something that this world is needing badly. And many of us that are on our own spiritual path, on our own path of development, realize that a big part of our development is actually learning how to heal ourselves. And so what I want to share today is some really deep insights as to the different kinds of wounds that we develop while we're trying to navigate through this crazy ass planet that we live on, and some of the different methods that we can use to help heal these things, and also to really give greater clarity to what we're doing. Because one of the issues that I think that many of us run into is that we've had a lot of stuff happen in our past. We don't actually know on what layer we are traumatized and what we can do to help. So I'm gonna really break it down simple for you so that you can bring some clarity to this understanding of what wounding is, the different levels that we get wounded on, and some of the methodologies that we can use to help us heal from that wounding. So to start, what I wanna start with is talking about neurological wounding. And neurological wounding is wounding that is actually the most deep-rooted, right? It's actually in our nervous system. So it is gotten to our autonomic nervous system. And the deepest kind of neurological wounding is experienced as an uncontrollable state that we move into when we are triggered into that. So different kinds of like PTSD, you can think of it like that. But essentially what's happened here is if you imagine imagine there's a button, and when you hit the button, it creates a particular response. But if you bash that button, then the button might get stuck on. So when we get traumatized really deeply at a young age from different things, what happens is like our button got smashed, and what got stuck on is like either a panic state or maybe it's like some sort of anger state or some sort of thing, usually having to do with fear, some sort of fear state, panic, that gets stuck in our nervous system, and we don't really know how to turn that button off, right? So it's always kind of on. Or if it's not quite as bad, then what happens is we maybe can snap out of the state, but then when some sort of external trigger comes into our environment, it's like our subconscious notices that, and it identifies that thing, and then it basically kickstarts this like panic state to come into us, and there's really nothing we can do. Oftentimes people that have this experience, and I've had this experience definitely before, I've been wounded like this, but oftentimes that people have the experience of having PTSD will say that, you know, when they see something in the environment and it triggers them, they'll know that it's ridiculous that they're being triggered, and this was my experience too. I knew that it was ridiculous, but I couldn't stop my body from doing it, right? My body just went into that space and felt like extremely nervous or afraid or whatever it was. I think this is actually really common. I think they've said something like 1 in 4 people has PTSD, but I actually think that it's probably even more than that. So we have a wounded culture, and this is a wound on a very core level, right? It's gotten into our autonomic nervous system. So in the same way our heart beats or we breathe without having to think, there's a little gnat in here. We breathe without having to think. It's the same thing. It's like it just naturally comes up, and it feels like there's nothing we can do to stop it. Now, different therapies that you can do for this are things like somatic experiencing, this is a particular method, or EMDR, which is a kind of, like you wear these glasses and it flashes lights at a really interesting and weird pace that gets into your neurological network and starts reprogramming your neurological networks. So there's different things that you can do to get into that. But where a lot of people run into trouble is sometimes people will be doing so much work on other levels, but they don't realize there's actually a neurological dysfunction in their body that is causing this kind of stress. And if you don't actually get to that neurological dysfunction, no matter how much you change your beliefs, no matter how much you work on different like positive thinking, it doesn't actually get into the autonomic nervous system and iron that stuff out. So it's really important to be aware of where you're wounded so that you can actually go and heal yourself in the right way. So that's the first level. Now the second level has to do with something that John Eisman calls the organic self and the trance self. So you can think of your organic self as something like your natural inspiration and expression, uninhibited, right? It's like, it's almost like a dog. You can imagine a dog is just like totally living in its organic self. It's just like whatever it feels, it's going for it. And it's like, you know, feels amazing and super excited and happy. And this is how children come into the world. We're really excited and we're inspired to do different things. We're inspired to have different experiences. And so when we feel that inspiration, we move towards that experience. Now what happens is throughout our life, oftentimes is we get either traumatized or we get repetitively reprimanded from being able to express ourselves. And what happens is over time, if we feel like we have urges or inspirations that we can't express in some way as a child, over time, we need to kind of take that urge and contort it and point it in another direction. And what happens when we do that is we're kind of, in a sense, like disowning a certain aspect of ourselves. We're denying a certain organic expression from playing itself out. And so what we do is we have to go into this kind of trance state in order to take us on a different path. So as a child keeps being told to shut up every time it speaks out loud, eventually it goes into this trance because it can't express its true self. And then when it feels like it wants to speak loudly, that triggers a trance state, and it goes into a trance state. So it's about understanding what the organic self is and then what trance states are. Now, ideally, a parent would raise a child in a way where they wouldn't reprimand them. They would identify what is this spark that is trying to be expressed in a particular way and help kind of gently guide them in a way of expressing that doesn't conflict too much with the order of whatever environment they're in. So they don't cause too much trouble in the environment, but they're still able to express themselves. And that's ideally what we want to be able to do for ourselves, is identify where we're going into trance states and identify what our natural inspiration is, and then learn how to express that natural inspiration in a way that is still harmonious with the world. You see, what blocks a lot of people, like feeling depressed or feeling stuck or like we don't know what to do or we don't feel inspired about life, all this oftentimes comes back to some sort of trauma or some sort of repetitive reprimanding that has prevented us from being able to express our true self. And then we've like lost our own identity in a sense. So we don't know what to do, or when we feel inspired for different things, we feel like we can't do that. We have all these different conflicting beliefs and we have conflicting feelings about the things that we once used to feel passionate about. And we end up really living our life in a trance. Or when we come across a situation where deep down, we might not even realize this. Deep down, we might feel inspired to do a particular thing, but it's so covered with a bunch of negative experiences that we had when we were feeling that inspiration earlier, that when we feel that inspiration, it actually just puts us into a trance. We can't actually express ourselves. So the idea is to get to the bottom of like, what are we truly inspired to do? What is our organic self? And then start identifying the trance states that we go into and start realizing that we can actually choose when we notice ourselves going into a trance. Be present in the moment. When you notice yourself starting to trickle into a trance, you can say, wait a second, I'm going into a trance and I don't have to go into this trance. You start developing a relationship with your organic self, and then you start understanding that you have a choice. And when you feel yourself going into a trance, you can actually take yourself out of that trance and choose to go back into your organic self and give yourself permission to express yourself. So that's the second level, trance states and organic states. Now, the third level is something that we're probably all a lot more familiar with. And this is the idea of like belief system modification, working with our thoughts, our beliefs, our stories, the things we tell ourselves. You see a lot of stuff on the internet, a lot of different methodologies for learning how to think positively, to change your beliefs and then change your identity of who you think you are. Give yourself a more empowered identity. And then this will set you free. And this is all good and right, and this is true. But the idea is that if we're not aware of our trance states or not aware of our neurological wounding, neurological dysfunction, then just changing our beliefs about ourselves is going to be really difficult, because we could start telling ourselves that we're this new person, but then as soon as we find that some sort of trigger comes up in our environment, it either knocks us into a trance or it activates some sort of PTSD that puts us in this stuck state. See, what happens is, over life, if we're repetitively being put in trance states or stuck states, then we start to develop identities and belief systems that are in alignment with those trance states and stuck states. So we start identifying ourselves as being stuck, or as being dumb, or as being weak, or as not being cool or easygoing, or whatever you want to say. But the truth of the matter is that all of these like labels that we've given ourselves, especially when they're negative, if it doesn't feel right, because being your true organic self feels right. So if it doesn't feel right, and we have an idea about ourselves that doesn't feel good and right, then that's not our organic self. And I've said this before, that you can just let all those thoughts go because it's not true. It's not you. What feels right is what is you. In other words, like a shoe that doesn't fit on your foot doesn't feel good because it's not you, it doesn't fit you. But a shoe that does fit you feels good because it fits you. So if you have an idea about yourself that doesn't feel good, that's not the true you. The organic you feels good. So if you have beliefs about yourself that don't feel good, they're actually not true. And even though you might be able to think back to all these experiences and all these reasons why that should be who you are, because you've experienced it so many times, what you have to realize is that if you've been traumatized in some way, or you've developed like the habit of going into trances, well, you've done that so much that then when you reflect on your behavior, you give yourself an identity in your head that matches that trauma or those trances. But that's not actually the true you. The true you is the organic self. It just got squished into patterns that didn't feel good, and you started creating an identity to match those uncomfortable patterns that were not your true expression. And working to heal on this level is the stuff that you hear in self-help all over the internet. Working on your belief systems, working on your identity, letting go of your story, right? Realizing that you can be anything that you want to be. But see, just doing this without doing any work on the nervous system level, or without coming into awareness of the kinds of patterns that you shift into when you go into a trance, the kind of neurological patterns and myelinations in your brain that you shift into when you get stimulated by something that kickstarts an old program, then you're basically just going to be chasing your tail. So it's important to work on all three of these different levels. And this is something I really wanted to share with people because I feel like a lot of people deserve to be healed. They deserve to find their way back to their organic self and start expressing themselves. And actually, that's the greatest gift that anybody can give the world, is a full expression of the organic self, because that's where the gifts really lie. They lie in our connection to our truth. So thank you so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Haize. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. If you haven't already downloaded the 3 Keys to Happiness, it's really, really powerful, really profound. I made a video on the 3 Keys to Happiness. It's really some potent fundamentals that will help anyone, whether you consider yourself a happy person or not, really tune in to something that really works for you. So go ahead and check that out. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time. One love.